Welcome everybody to my new spot on the Late Show. I know it's a change of day and I know it's a change of time, but the venue is the same, www.energy-therapies.IntuiTalks.com. And if you pop along over to IntuiTalks at any time, you'll see the lineup of shows available to you. I've got 2 shows running every week. We have got a psychic affair on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. All my shows are only 1 hour, so don't be slouchy. And of course, now we've got 8 episodes in my new series, Voices from the Past, which is on tonight. Episode 1 is Dead Sea Scrolls. So we're looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls from a perspective today, which is very generalized, and then we'll be moving into it to more specifics. There's some amazing text in there, so we'll have a look at some of it. And of course, for the main part, what we're looking at here is the fact that they're so old. They're so amazing. And what they give us is they give us a challenge, I suppose. They give us a challenge to modern writings and belief spirituality, modern religion, if you like, that's not so modern. So we'll start a little bit about language, because I think it's important to understand the language as things go. And I've got a picture here for you of a Sumerian tablet. And so when you hear the words tablets, we've got this idea in our mind of something more like the Flintstones, you know, where they're boom, 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 boom. But they're very complex. And if you have a look at this tablet here, you're really seeing something that would take ages and a lot of skills. Now, you can see it's sectioned off into squares. Now, this is what they call the Kish tablet, and it is a letter, in actual fact, is what you're looking at, sent by the high priest Luwina to the king of Lagash, informing him of his son's death in combat. Now, this is dated 2400 BC, and it was found in ancient Gersu or Talo. So you've got this is what a tablet actually looked like when you hear those words tablet. When you think about it, you can now actually envisage that a tablet's really a chunk of rock. It's sectioned. You can see the sections through here, right? It's actually got sections cut into it, which may be perhaps paragraphs. I suppose it would be paragraphs. Really, really interesting. And languages, as we talk about, a lot of the language we're looking at was ancient documents with amazing stuff as Sanskrit, which has a direct lineage, along with Latin, to the Sumerian language. This is a language that was spoken in southern Mesopotamia mainly, which is now modern Iraq, during the 3rd millennium BC, which is a bloody long time ago. It is a lot of cultural sort of understanding and mixed with the Akkadians. And so later on you hear a lot about the Akkadians and the Akkadians text. And basically these are 2 nations that sort of become, yes, it does look like a jigsaw puzzle, Kathy. These are two, not so much nations as we think of nations today as separate countries, but 2 groups of people that integrated so efficiently that they became, the Sumerian part of it became sort of lost within and integrated with the Akkadians. And of course, what they had that we don't seem to have so much of today is sort of a widespread bilingualism. Is that a word? And what they did was they shared a lot of words and it became integrated. And if you think about English is probably the ultimate compilation of language, which is quite a fascination. You know, there's bits of Latin, bits of Hebrew, bits of French, German, there's old Roman. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff thrown in there. So it's probably along the same lines of how language evolved, which I think is pretty phenomenal. And if we understand how language evolved in certain areas, what we learn from that is how to interpret these documents when they are found. Yeah, we can move on from that, really. I don't need to say anything more about that, because as Akkadian gradually replaced Sumerian as a spoken language by about 2000 BC, they still continue to use Sumerian language for religious texts. You know, they were sacred texts, so they still kept a separation. So it's a bit like, I suppose, the church today, which keeps Latin for its religious text, or the Hebrew of Judaism versus modern language. Here we go, Roger. Not to mention all the new words that we invent daily. And that's true, you know, like the French have an actual council of French to maintain their the integrity of their language, so it doesn't become too bastardized, I suppose. And I've got a thing about bastardizing things. It's like like I say, often they get dumbed down, they get watered down, they get changed and milked, they turn homogenized, I suppose, so that you lose the depth and the energy that goes with them, which is a little bit of a shame. In fact, it's a big shame, because by understanding origins and by understanding ancestry and the energy that goes with it, you can effect change in a really profound way. And so it's not about harping to the past and staying in the past. It is about evolving the past, but you can't evolve without an origin. And as you lose touch with that origin, you also lose touch with the strength, the conviction of language. And language, as scientists found a wee while ago, just a couple of years now, I think 2013, 2014, scientists proved that your cells, yes, your cells, understand language. Each individual cell, I'm pinching my hand here to put emphasis on this point, understand language. So if as a baby, as you are being carried around by your mother, you understand language before you're even born. You have an innate genetic predisposition to language because of thousands of years of humans using it. That's how important this is, really, when you think about it. If we hadn't used language for thousands upon thousands of years, we wouldn't have genetically modified our systems to understand nuance, to understand the energy behind a word as much as the word itself. So it all goes together. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, you know, the words that we use today. I swear a lot in normal day-to-day life. And a lot of people do. And New Zealanders, Australians in particular, we're really bad for it. We're just really bad for it. We just swear all the time. It's just nothing. Or so we thought. A Canadian school, for those Canadians here, will be pleased to know you've bought a few amazing innovations and tests or experiments that have been taken on in other parts of the world. That have been he's swearing, he doesn't swear, in other parts of the world. And New Zealand, for whatever reason, has a sistership with parts of Canada, and so we get to play with these things first. And one of the more interesting things done a couple of years ago was a New Zealand high school, which is our ages of 14 to 17. We have a high school. We don't separate college and high school. We go from an intermediate, which is at 13. We start high school at 13. We finish that at 17, 16 to 17 now, I think. And then you go to university after that. So there's nothing else there. So with the language in schools being what it is, and being pretty much accepted for the most part, you're not going to be disciplined unless you swear aggressively at a teacher or a parent or an adult, and even in some schools, not even that. What a group decided to do was to try this Canadian experiment, and they sold for a few dollars each to raise funds, little friendship bracelet type things. And those that bought it were affirming that they would not swear for a 30-day period. And so they sold quite a few. They sold more than they thought they would, but they did find out that after 3 months of selling these bracelets, there were less conflicts in the school. There was less aggression. There was less theft, right? And the actual fights, as in physical fights, dropped by over 80%. So while we think of this negative language, if you like, you know, the F's and the C's and all of that goes in between or below, that we think of that as a harmless language, but there is an energy of origin regardless of how we use it. And a person is more likely to rack up when they're sworn at than they are if they are told off without a swear word being involved, or if there's an argument without swearing, there's less likely to be an elevated anger, if you like. So it's quite an interesting thing. My point being is that we can't escape energy that goes with a word, no matter what we like to think. We can't really escape it. Maybe in another 500 years, that energy will be taken out of the words. I'm certainly not offended by them. So forgetting, you know, offense and all that stuff, we need to understand that language is phenomenal. And Sumerian language in particular is the earliest known, not verbal, right, not verbiage, but it's the earliest known written language. And if you have a look at the characters there, they're definite characters. And so you can see how Arabic, if you like, and the Sanskrit, Indian, Thai languages evolved from this, and you can see even perhaps shades of the Asian languages, the Chinese, the Japanese, etc. So as we move on, this Kish tablet is the single oldest tablet known, which was found 2400 BC, as I said earlier. Now, Sanskrit and Latin and the Aramaic language are a direct outgrowth of this language that we're looking at right now. There's the question, isn't it? Is there any? when you've got to type it out like that, when you've got to carve it into, would you waste your words? When I was in Thailand, I discovered for the first time that that they didn't use paragraphs, they didn't use pronunciation type. They didn't use grammar. They just wrote in a straight line like this, start of the page to finish of the page, etc., all the way down. And then it's up to the reader to discern the meaning. They do that very well. So they've got a greater ability to take on nuance, because the writer isn't telling you how to interpret, which will come into play, profanity, which will come into play as we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the amazing fact that a lot of them were written in this way, not all of them. So at a single period of time, over a couple of hundred years that they were written, it's an interesting thing to see that they were written by different people, they were involved in different ways, and they were written on different materials, and they were written in something like 4 different languages, and the scholars of the time were as much worldly as the scholars of today in that respect, that they had this understanding. Even the Mesopotamia, at that time, there was a standard Latin, Greek and Hebrew being used, so it was very rare that there would be a single language, which meant most people were probably bilingual, or most people would be bilingual. So over the period of 1947 to 1956, in 11 caves, right, around 981 different texts were discovered, made of papyrus, parchment, and bronze, copper actually it is, and estimated to be created around 400 BC, 408 BC to 318 years CEA. So that's a period of 700 years. Okay, that's my math, and I'm sticking with it, right or wrong. Now, this picture here is actually one of the caves, the original cave that was found, and I always find it amazing that from this angle it looks like a keyhole, right? It's like, oh, isn't that a coincidence? And you can see the bit at the top. So he was shepherding one of these dudes. The 2 went in. I can't tell you which one was first, but these are the 2 guys who discovered it. And he was literally just throwing pebbles into a hole in the ground, and then instead of hearing the pebble hit the bottom, he heard the breaking of pottery. And so him and his cousin bro, went on in and found what we now know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, they found them in jars. Originally, they would have been packed in like this. These aren't the original jars. The jars were found broken mostly, and the documents were in pieces and are in pieces. So although some pieces were fairly complete, they were in their shape, but they were deteriorating. So I'm really glad they did find them when they did, which was in 1947. But of course, we go a little bit further now. So it was a Bedouin shepherd who found them, but now we've got to bring them out to the world. So it was an interesting thing that, you know, when they had to do this, things didn't go well. So these guys first that they found them knew they had something really old, and so they ran off and tried to sell some. Now, for all the criticism you can, it still goes on today. It's a really big deal today, the selling of old artifacts and illegal trade in artifacts, and they're trying to get a lid on it, because we're a country should own its own history. Also, as soon as it gets into the hands of private collectors, the world never gets to see it. They hide it. Whatever they're doing it for. Why? I don't know. Why would you do that? A lot of money can be spent, and there's a German collector right at the moment who's come under a lot of fire for holding on to some of these documents that he bought and denying where he bought them from, and a whole pile of stuff. But the main scandal around these was really for the 20th century. And I can remember when in the 90s, these things hit the scene, and the spiritual world in New Zealand anyway was like, whoa, this has got a huge impact. This is amazing. But in actual fact, for the spiritual world, it had less impact than one might think, but a lot of interest. Let's put it that way. Most of what's in there, we kind of know. What it's done is it's showing us a few things. But back to the scandal, because we've got to have scandals. The academic scandal of the 20th century, it was called, because of the long delay in publication. In other words, once they got it, they hung on to it. And, of course, the longer they held on to it, the longer they kept it hidden, the more in general, scholars around the world, spiritualists, religious groups and leaders started claiming that they must contain controversial matter. They must contain things that would upstage or usurp the believers in the Bible, and we're going back before the Bible, we're going back to the Torah. The origin of our Bible, whether we want to admit it or not, is the Torah, especially the Old Testament. And so you're looking at this big, huge mystery now. It becomes like, why are they not publishing it? Why are they not letting scholars look at it? These world artifacts like this need everybody possible looking at them so they can be interpreted, and it can be like a double-blind experiment. You know, the guys that are interpreting it are not the only ones of importance. They're not the only ones of interest. The guys watching the guys are of interest, because for the rest of the world, that gives us our checks and balances, right? If you've got one group, either Catholics or the Jews, or if you've got one group like the German billionaire who's got his own scholars in his pocket that he pays for, you can easily start following a track of convenience, right? Roger says even the Smithsonian ferrets artifacts away in their vault simply because no one wants to rewrite the history books. I'm sure it is that way to a certain extent. The question is it because nobody wants to rewrite the book, or is it because they're scared of being shown up, or for things to be, yes, exactly as Kathy says, because we may find out the truth. So this became the big argument that made it more famous and more spiritually significant, and for paranormal, this whole burgeoning world of knowledge questing decided, for good or for bad, that there must be something well hidden. So I don't think they did themselves any favors unless they were genuinely trying to hide things. And of course, it leaves them open to criticism that they may still be hiding things, if you like, because nobody can actually prove how many they've got. They can only know how many they say they've got to start with. So that's sort of what's behind it. The manuscripts themselves shed unprecedented, see that facially unprecedented light on things like the Torah, Judaism around that era before Christ was born, a long time before Christ was born, and of course before Christianity was even thought of, which was mentioned before Christ's birth, Christianity. And some of the contents conflict with the accounts contained in the New Testament. Only 20% of the texts were published upon discovery, and the other 80% remained locked away in a secret vault, are you ready, at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem for about 35 years, causing fury among archaeologists. Now, these are just the initial findings, not all of the 981 texts that were found, okay? So this is just that very first cave, the very first ones that came out that were sold, end up in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem, and then nobody looks at them again. And archaeologists, scholars, religious leaders are all very, very peeved. The writings are by and large original, or as near as anyone could ever hope to be, the origin of the Torah. The fragments of every book of the Hebrew Bible, except the book of Esther, were found in the Qumran caves, the most famous of the Dead Sea Scrolls sites. And remarkably, some of these ancient copies are identical to the traditional text of the Hebrew Bible that is used today. Other copies preserve differences in the text, which was in the process of standardization. In other words, you know, that comes from the museum, by the way, and they're talking about, I think it was the book of Abraham, there was 19 copies, and the book of Daniel, 15 copies of the same book, and they have slightly different texts. And they're saying that they're looking at standardizing it, and I'm thinking that every writer, when you're looking at handwriting massive texts like this, is going to perhaps, you know, shorten a word here or there, make a mistake, miss a paragraph. Perhaps, I'm not saying for sure, but clearly they're not all writing individual copies. They must be, at the very least, they must be copying them, right, from the original. So one of these is the original that they were copying from. In general, it is thought that they were written during the Second Temple period in Jewish history, and this lasted from 530 BC to 70 CE, and the Second Temple of Jerusalem existed then. The sects of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots were formed during this period, and they fascinate me, by the way. They fascinate me. They fascinate me. Do a lot of research on them, and we will get there. We will get there. We will start looking at these ancient civilizations and where they were at spiritually. Quite an amazing, amazing thing. So this particular slide here actually says, I love it, I love it, I love it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. The darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So with that interpretation, we know that not just with this one, we've got a few more to show you, that the original Bible, the Torah, regardless of interpretation into English that may offer variance, was actually a true and is actually a fairly true copy of the text that they found, minus a few bits, and these are the bits that are juicy, really. As you move on, we can have a look at this one here. Now, this one is slide 5, is how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. This is part of Psalms, and the book of Psalms is one of the best preserved biblical scrolls, containing 48 Psalms, including 7 that are not found in the standard Masoretic version of the Bible. In other words, they didn't come forward to us. An additional prose passage provides one of the most ancient references to King David as the composer of the book of Psalms. It says, and David, the son of Jesse, was wise and a light like the light of the sun, and he wrote 3,600 Psalms. That is Psalm 133 shown here, and it praises peace and togetherness. In fact, that's reiterated throughout all interpretations of the scrolls that have been interpreted, published, that there is this constant and ongoing push towards peace. Now, this is important when we've had so much religious violence, throughout the last few thousand years. Whether we're looking at the Crusades, which we've talked about before, or whether you're looking at the birth of the birth and the shift and movement of Islam and the changes through Buddhism, when you start looking at how these things have broken down and broken away, as soon as you look at very ancient texts that nobody can deny, the basis of all religion pretty much, then you can't deny the fact that peace, not religious fervor, were advocated at all times. So a pretty powerful statement, which keeping that hidden actually probably doesn't benefit anybody, because we seem to be so blasé about the breaking of any commandment, aren't we? If a guy goes out and kills another guy, or a chick goes out and kills her husband, whichever way you want to go there, we're horrified. We hate it. But then if you send a guy out to go and kill somebody and call it war, then we say, oh, yeah, well, actually there are reasons to do that. Question from Kathy, do you think that the scrolls were done for all religions? I don't think the scrolls were religious at all. That's what I don't think. So there you go. But we're talking about the basis. So because we're going back over 2,000 years before Jesus was born, so we start there, the idea of the word religion is different. If you go back and look at my shows on Jainism and a number of the different sects, if you like, religious sects, all of their temples were open to all beliefs. If you go back to the ancient Greeks, they had multiple gods and goddesses, and each temple was for a god or a goddess, but you could pray at all of them. You could go to whichever one you needed or you felt like. If you look at Buddhism, Buddhism doesn't herald the Buddha as Christianity does Christ. What the Buddha is a part of the whole. The Buddha was the person who gave them the message of love and peace and how to live life fully and correctly. But they actually have a Buddha for every day of the week, So there's this very generalized and open. If you go to a temple in Asia, a Buddhist temple, they don't care what religion you are. And that was the ancients were like that. They really seem to have been like everything I've read, everything I've looked at before Christianity came along. We're not blaming Christianity for all of it, but before competitive religion came along, the peaceful religions were the ones that essentially ended up getting smashed out, weren't they? Where there was peace, there became war. You look at, as I said, the Jainists have their temples, and say to this day, in Islamic and Muslim countries, their temples are open to all worshippers. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your faith is. The temple is the place you do the worship. It doesn't represent religion. And I think we're talking about that with the Dead Sea Scrolls. They represent a belief in life. And as we go through, you're going to be really interested to see a few very interesting terms that we take to mean one thing, but originally meant something else. Now, these are the originals. By the way, the slides here are actually the ones that I'm giving you the interpretation for. And these come from specifically the Dead Sea Scrolls Foundation, and there's a few sites that are official. Do look for those because everybody else sort of ad-libs. But it's an interesting thing that we've got them saying that David wrote 3,600 psalms. And, of course, we've got 36 days to a year and 360 degrees as a circle and so forth and so forth. Very interesting, anyway, from a numerical point of view. Now, this slide 6 is a copy of the book of Leviticus, and it's actually called Paleo-Leviticus. And it's written in ancient Hebrew script used in the first temple times. Now, this is important because if you understand what the temple times are, we've got the first temple times, the Temple of Solomon, before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed that temple and destroyed the throne of Solomon, the Temple of Solomon, which of course people treat as a hallowed space, the first temple. And of course it's where the site of Solomon's Temple is where the Templars, the Knights Templars, went and developed their headquarters. They wanted specifically to be there. And when we talk about, for those of you that have listened to the Knights Templar, a show that I did a while back, if you still haven't, go and have a listen to it. They're all here and they're on Spreaker as well as iTunes, Google Play, and Kiwi 6 and Stitcher. So and there may be more by now because Jenny just keeps putting them out there for us all. When you start looking at why they wanted to go there, there's this whole culture of treasure hunting around the Knights Templar. But then the question becomes, okay, we know what they did and we know how they got rich and we know what they got from that. But what were they looking for at that site? What were they hoping to find that they wanted to be in Jerusalem for? What were they looking for that they wanted to be in these places for? What is the Catholic Church looking for that they wanted religious strongholds? And I know it wasn't missionary. They weren't missions. They weren't trying to convert people at that time. They were there for a reason. I've always felt that's my personal belief. But in this ancient Hebrew script, the fragment shown here deals with the prohibition. So we're going to love this for a second. The prohibition against the ancient cultic practice of sacrificing children to the Semitic god Molech, and the punishments for violating this ban. So there was a time where you sacrificed your kids to a god, and for whatever reason, and of course now they made a law against it. So we're talking about revelations in regard to society, community, what they believe in. And what I'm going to look at a lot more closer going forward is the 12 minor prophets. This is exactly that. And if you have a look, you see these yellow highlighted pieces here and there. That's actually editing. They're editing their own scripts here. So this person's writing it out and editing it. You know, there's no delete. You've just got to do it on site. And so they're getting an insight into the terminology, the wordage, how things are put together. But this is the 12 minor prophets, and the scrolls of the Judean desert offer early evidence of the compilation of these short prophetic books. Now, we didn't get all of them into the Bible, unfortunately, but these were a single literary work. They weren't broken up and dumped around all over the place. So the prophets themselves, or the 12 minor prophets, it's known as, so we're talking 12 prophets. These were discovered in an interesting name of a cave called the Cave of Horror at Nahal Hiva, which contains a prophecy of Micah about the end of days and the rise of a ruler out of Bethlehem. And so these are a lot of these prophecies of the end of days prophecies, which is interesting insofar as these are probably, if not likely, the basis for the end of days prophets, which didn't start till the 50s, by the way, and these big end-of-days religions or cults or groups, call them whatever you like. And, of course, it's noticeable then, of course, that the end-of-days prophecies from the 50s came out only after these Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So I think in that way they've had a profound effect on modern religion and belief. The prophecies by Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Daniel. I did that show on A Psychic Affair, the prophecies of Ezekiel. Daniel was where one of the first prophecies. So these are the great prophets of the Bible, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Daniel. But there are prophecies in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were not found in the Bible, and we're going to go more into those at another show. They're written in scrolls, and as they were now what we know excluded texts in the Bible creation of Constantine, it isn't too surprising. They may have not been around to be included, or they may have been deliberately excluded. This is so far before the choice of text to go into what was considered to be a common Bible that, the agenda could not have been equal. So the texts probably, though, were known, since we have an ongoing and systematic following, almost word for word, of the rest of the Torah. The question becomes then, right, Esther was clearly separately added or hanging around somewhere else. Hiya, Darlene. Or they were deliberately left out because they didn't like these particular prophecies, whichever way you want to go. And that brings us to the crux of the controversy is, okay, let's have a look at these prophecies so we can decide for ourselves. Loons wave, do they, darling? So it's a huge, big deal. There was lobbying back then. It was, if you could imagine a government body coming together to create legislation, and into the broom pile all the people with what they want. We want this and this and this and this. And then the people that are trying to stop them, and then the people that have already got what they want and they don't want anything to change because it's working for them nicely. So you can imagine that in Constantine's day, 300 years or 300 odd so years after the birth of Christ, where we've got all these religious leaders from all of the worlds that are run and owned and ruled by the Romans, which is 300 AD, CE, 367 CE, something like that. And so we've got him doing this, and we've got all of these people putting this all together, not for a frivolous reason. Constantine got fed up with different religious groups killing each other. And that's what I mean about the 10 Commandments of convenience. So the 10 Commandments are actually in these original scripts as well, the 10 Commandments. So basically everything out of the Torah, the Old Testament, all here in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Anybody wishing to gain religious dominance would make sure that the text that saved their belief, their system, would find its way into this Bible. So you had little groups then, like the UN, forming little mini coalitions to make sure that they got what they wanted out of it or into their own space. So it's quite fascinating. Most of the scrolls that come from the Qumran caves are religious writings, but they aren't all. And they are mostly from the Second Temple period, and the Second Temple period is, I've got it written here somewhere, I don't know where I put it, lost it. The Second Temple period is the period of, I would have thought I'd have put it right there, silly me. The Second Temple period is the period of a Yahad anyway. I can't remember the dates. Oh, here we go. 132 to 135. No, that's not right. So anyway, back to the story. They reflect the life and philosophy of a distinctive group that called itself the Yahad. Anyway, they seem to be the dominant force of the time. And the Yahad simply means community. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything else. And so it's an exposure of their desire, if you like, their need, their willingness to put community first. These are the scrolls of the Yahad, the community. Just a fascinating thing. There's also the prophecies. All of the prophecies and the community scrolls are in and around the same thing. So it's almost, this is a collective ideal. It's a way that things will work as a collective. When I think back to Ezekiel, and it fascinated me to discover that he wandered around like a nutter. He'd grow his beard, he'd live outside, he'd draw on clay to show people that the end of the world was coming. He would smash them, like smashing the guitar on stage. He would do a lot of things to get the attention of the people because he had this message from God. That's how he saw his prophecies, as a message from God. They were prophecies regardless of where they came from. So fascinating stuff to be able to read them in total, or to read some that aren't actually in the Bible, that haven't been altered a little bit to suit the modern palate, which modern going back to, of course, Constantine's time. Just a fascinating thing. The other sites, the major finds were administrative, personal documents. There's a lot of information that dated from the Judean revolt against Rome in 132 to 135 CE as well. So it's a lot of history as well as spiritual, including sectarian scrolls, which are the non-religious scrolls. And if you have a look here, this is an ancient mikveh. It's called a mikveh. I try to say it correctly, mikveh. These Qumran tomes emphasize spiritual purity and ritual purification through immersion in a ritual bath. And when you look at the whirling dervishes, the cleanliness, when you even look at Muslims, the hand washing, constant cleaning is definitely something that's come forward by thousands and thousands of years. I don't believe that it started as a religious ideal. I really don't. I don't even think if it was written in non-spiritual or biblical text that it was intended to be religious. It's clear to me that if you keep yourself clean, they were learning about hygiene, keep yourself clean and less people die, right? It's pretty straightforward. And then somewhere in the medieval times, that all got lost and everybody just got filthy for a while. In Europe, it was a disgusting place. England, disgusting place. So when you start thinking about that, then what the origins of cleanliness were, I don't doubt for one second, had everything to do with the basic word hygiene, which comes from a very long time ago than it did from religious. But this is interpretive spin, isn't it? There's always got to be, these texts are referred to as biblical, except that they predate a Bible, and therefore they're not technically biblical. What they're telling us is that when they look at these texts, they can see areas that have become the Torah. There are a lot that are not. So it's not specific. As we move on, they've got the last words. They've got the dying words. Are we ready? Of Judah, of Joseph, of Levi, of Naphtali, and Amram, the father of Moses. They're all written down in these scrolls. They're dying words. That means the people that sat with them as they died recorded their words. Now, they weren't famous people. Back then, they were not what you would consider famous people. The father of Moses, Amram, who even knew his name, right? So we've got a whole lot of interesting stuff going on there. This is one of the more curious scrolls. This picture here, there's a couple of slides I've created. They're the copper scrolls, and they were discovered in Cave 3. This scroll, look at it there, say that correctly. This scroll, that's what it actually looks like in color. It records a list of 64 underground hiding places throughout the land of Israel. The deposits are to contain certain amounts of gold, silver, aromatics, and manuscripts. These are believed to be treasures from the temples of Jerusalem that were hidden away for safekeeping. Now, the belief in that is that, of course, with the Judean revolt, I don't know if you know anything about it, but it was a disaster. It went horribly wrong, and they got squashed by the Romans. Kaboom, kaboom, bam. The Romans were master fighters. It was sort of like taking out an American modern Navy SEALs group and sending them into the suburbs and saying, okay, you guys defend yourself with what you've got in your house. It doesn't matter if it's a gun. It's nothing compared to what they've got at their disposal. So this is what the Romans were like. They were the master conquerors of their day. Them and the Spaniards, kaboom, kaboom, they were just dealing to everybody that got in their way or had something that they wanted. And so they were spiriting these away in these caves to protect them. They knew, they were thinking ahead, pretty much the same way we would do now if you knew that a particular place, well, they've done it now, haven't they? In Iraq, they've now got the artifacts, ancient artifacts safekeeping, and they're encouraging people to bring any artifacts out of war zones if they know where they are, or to tell them, and they bring them all to this one place so that after conflict they can return them to the people rather than them being raped and pillaged by invading forces, etc., or sold underground by the poor who are trying to make a living because they're struggling. So it's a very interesting thing. So there's 64 underground hiding places. Now I come back to the Templars. Now, while these weren't discovered in modern times till 1947, who's to say that there weren't those that knew about them prior or had perhaps other, these aren't the only caves there are, so perhaps there were other discoveries this is the only copper scroll found, so there was possibly other copper scrolls, or there were other scrolls found another long time earlier than 1947, where perhaps there were those that were treasure seeking even then. So quite a fascinating thought for me to look at that. And so that's it unrolled. I mean, it would be delicate, it would be beautiful, it would be the most amazing, amazing thing, wouldn't it, to just look on that. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls go around the world now, so keep an eye out and or type in, to your local museums and ask if they're planning on getting it, and go and have a look. You can have a look at something that is that old, the original fantastic history of modern religion, really. But no, I don't believe it was religious. So there we go. There's the next temple scroll. This is found in Cave 11. Is amazing in itself. This thing, it's like, the speech that goes on and on and on and on. Its present total length is 26.7 feet, which is 8 and a bit meters. I'll say 8 and a bit meters. It's actually 8.148 meters. And the overall length of the scroll, they estimate, must have been over 28 feet. So it's only lost a little bit, which is 8.75. So can you imagine writing this thing? Dunk, 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 dunk. And as you're writing, you're rolling it up on one end as you're writing it along, but you have to have this parchment or whatever it is, going on. I don't know whether they had to glue them together or what, but what a fascinating thing. Now, this temple scroll has in it some fascinating stuff. A new passage in the book of Samuel that may help explain the missing prophecy. And these are where the Dead Sea Scrolls get exciting to me. They referred to in the Nativity story, right? The Jesus in the cradle story is the Nativity story that appears in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, if you haven't read Matthew, you don't have to run along and read Matthew, but he cites 5 ancient prophecies. So you could put in, if you wanted to get to know them better, Book of Matthew, 5 ancient prophecies. He cites it. So he mentions 5, okay, that he says were fulfilled by the birth of Jesus. So that's the actual statement, 5 ancient prophecies that are fulfilled by the birth of Jesus. 4 of those appear in the traditional Hebrew Bible. The 5th prophecy, that the Messiah will be called a Nazarene, was not in the Bible, but it is in this piece of paper that you're looking at here, this parchment that you're looking at here, is a phenomenal thought, isn't it? So now we're going, okay, so we've got bits that didn't make the cut. When we talk about them chopping out text, they didn't chop out a whole 28-foot text. They chopped out the bits that didn't suit them. Now, back then, politically, calling him Nazarene or knowing he was Nazarene was probably apolitical. It would be like saying, that the next president of America was going to be a Fijian named blah, blah, Everybody would be horrified. What? And so we're talking about that kind of political environment when they're deciding who goes into what. So it's a fascinating thing. Now, what we're talking about here is Matthew is talking about the prophecies. Therefore, Matthew is talking about something he has read. Dr. Ulrich, a specialist, a Dead Sea Scrolls specialist, says it is clear that Matthew was reading an edition of the biblical prophets that we don't have. The location of that prophecy remains a mystery, but Ulrich says a passage in the Qumran version 1 Samuel contains language that is startlingly close. In other words, all of these people were reading in the Bible, or a certain percentage of them were reading from this. This is the original textbook, the original school book that they're all quoting left, right, and center. They are not the original writers, and so that in itself tells you that they are having access to it from somewhere. It's just a fascinating, beautiful, and amazing thing to me that you've got something we're reading today, regardless of whether you're into the Bible or not. It's an interesting story at the very least. It's got some amazing history. It's got a lot of, I love the prophecies. I love Revelations. They're great stuff, and I'm not religious. But the Bible itself is an ancient description for us. It's something that's brought forward from a very long time ago. And that deserves to be counted, I feel, anyway. There are certain areas, I do get fed up with people just quoting off their favorite bits of the Bible or any bit that they find that suits them, even if it's been changed and altered and all the rest, while ignoring the truth of the rest. And the truth is that the whole thing has merit and interest for us. If you read it properly without the slant, then what you're going to look at is you're going to look at something that's just as fascinating as what we're looking at here. And since the Torah, not so much the Western Bible, but the Torah is almost verbatim, and I say almost verbatim, in the books that they have found, it says that actually it's a pretty true representation of the original writings. So I think that's pretty awesome in itself, if nothing else. There are a few new things in the old version. There's a new version of the book of Joshua that portrays the invading Israelites building an altar to the Lord immediately after crossing the Jordan River at Gilgal. And in the traditional Bible, the Israelites erect the altar far to the north of Mount Ebal and then inexplicably abandon it. Look, we built that, let's go, and return to the south. Now, for many thousands of years, people have been trying to interpret, why would they do that? Then we look at the original and we go, oh, they didn't. They never did do that. It just didn't make sense when you read it now, and then, of course, now we've got why, because they didn't do that. So somebody misinterpreted at some point or put what they wanted in there. Maybe they wanted their particular piece of the country on the map, so to speak. Scroll scholars now think the traditional passage may have been edited, and I'm like, really? You think? So, but the question becomes, which parts are edited and why? And that is the fascinating part right then. The Qumran version, says Ehrlich, the same specialist, it makes much more sense, right? And is corroborated by Jewish historian Josephus. And Josephus is an interesting read as well, a provocative rewrite of the story of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son Isaac in the traditional Bible. That's the Bible we all read, okay? In that Bible tale, the God commands, and I mean, let's face it, if we're talking about this huge God creature, why the hell would he tell a man to murder his son? You know, why would he sacrifice your son? Now we come back to this. We think, okay, that's in the Bible. Go and sacrifice your son to me, and then we come back to here. We have proof that it was outlawed, it was banned to sacrifice children, okay? And so we're going, okay, all right, we've got these two things here. We're suddenly seeing that there's actually a legal proclamation saying it's illegal for you to sacrifice your children and you will be punished if you do so. So here we have in the more modern Bible a version of Abraham God telling Abraham to sacrifice his son. So it becomes a very interesting question that leaves something really huge. But in the original text, it takes on a slightly different look because now God hasn't actually done what people think. Instead of the angels staying Abraham's knife and pointing him to the ram, over there, go kill the sheep, trapped in a thicket, as a substitute sacrifice for God. The second thing about that whole idea is that God would be fooled by this. He would think, oh, yeah, okay, I've asked him to go kill his kid, and I'm omnipresent, know everything, and here he is, he's going to kill a sheep, and I'm not going to know that he's done that. And an angel that I created, by the way, before I created man, is going to go and betray me and tell him not to do it. All very weird stuff, right? Or because his intentions were that he would do it, we will save him from doing it because it just proves that he loves me above his own family. All sorts of weird stuff going on in there if you want to read about it. Infanticide, in the original scroll, Vanderkam, before the original scroll, there was a professor at the University of Notre Dame, and he always questioned, and very publicly questioned, why, as a theological question, how could God tempt Abraham to slay, how could God tempt Abraham to slay his son? And of course, any of us say that. I just said that. And in the Qumran text, he says, attempts to soften the blow of God's action by introducing a Satan figure. Now, he says Satan, it doesn't say Satan. It's a figure called Mastema, or Prince of Malevolence, who goads God into the test. So now we've got a God who, according to the original text from way, way back, could be egotistically inclined because he's been goaded into a test with the devil, if you like, or with some kind of malevolent being who says, go on, let's just see what he will do if you put him to the test. And so God does not originate the evil but merely countenance it and permits Abraham to prove his faithfulness. So your faithfulness, and it's this huge kind of weird thing. the whole question around all of this is very suspect. It's like, really? Come on, dudes. So we start to question the word God. What are they actually talking about? Are they talking about God? Are they talking about an extra being out there? Or are they actually talking about some inner spiritual being, as in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, when they talk about all these spirits that you're going to see after you've died? They tell you that this is all in your head, which I think is phenomenal. We just need to look at a schizophrenic. I was listening to a psychology. I do psychology training stuff, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I was listening to one of the video breakdowns on psychosis and schizophrenia and a case study of a schizophrenic, and I just sort of thought, the big deal for me here is that all of these psychologists make out that it's really unusual to hear voices in your head, right? And I'm like, we all hear voices in our head, don't we? Or is it just me? Because I don't want to be schizophrenic, so you all have to, right? You all have to be hearing voices in your head too to make me normal. And if you're all hearing voices in our head, if we're all hearing good voices or bad voices or mean voices, mummy voices, daddy voices, strange voices, if we're all hearing these voices, then is there such a thing genuine as a schizophrenic hearing voices? Are they hearing themselves, their own thoughts, as we do hear them as voices? And so I didn't see one person type in that they heard voices, which disappoints me greatly. In your own head, you hear voices. We think in voice, we think in sound, we think in memory, we think in all these ways. And so it questions or leaves open to question what exactly they're talking about here, because none of it absolutely makes sense. But here we go, the mystery authors. Nobody knows who actually wrote these. There have, in actual fact, been corrections made to the Qumran, to the latest editions of the Bible, by the way, because of these texts. It's not bad when I take my headphones off, says Roger. Ha ha! You hear this voice in your head now. Now it's the scary time. I want to kill myself. But other issues still divide the scholars, really. One is the nature and identity of the people who wrote the documents, and this is a big question. I'm going with the Essenes, but of course that's a question. They were written and hidden by the Roman invaders in the caves. And, of course, the strongest theory is still that they belonged to belonged to the Essenes, that they were written by the Essenes, who were said to have predicted the coming of the three Christs, by the way, which we'll look at another time when we look at the Essenes, which is another series. Unfortunately, it's not this one. We've got too many yummy things to do. We've got the incantation bowls. We've got the Egyptian Book of the Dead. We've got so much awesome stuff. So it's fantastic to look forward to. But then I'll go into some of these lost civilizations, if you like. I'm not sure if I'll call it that, but, the Essenes withdrew into the desert. They separated themselves out deliberately, and from there there's not a lot known about them, but what is known is definitely fascinating and mostly hearsay. But there are some writings that they constantly, even in the Bible, come back. There's mentions. It's elusive, it's intriguing, it's captivating, the mentions of these different groups that were around in those times, and that seem to just sort of disappear and fade away. They were ascetic Jews, which of course we've got ascetic Jews now, and so with them withdrawing, the idea is that they did that to await the coming of the Messiah. And I'm like, well, really? Do you think? Maybe not. But I do believe, like many energy-based spiritual practices like the Shugats, and there's a whole lot I could go into them. The origins of Reiki is not Reiki. It comes from something that was already existing in Japan long before that, Shurigen. And these guys all separated themselves. The Tibetan monks, they all separated themselves, and why they did that was to maintain the purity of what they understood, to not their belief, but to take their practices and narrow themselves down so far with meditation, with chanting, with breath exercises, to gain their prophecies, to gain their communications, whatever you want to call it, the information that's coming to these people from whether it's deep inside themselves or somewhere outside of themselves. They were singularly focused on narrowing their group down so that they could create the best energy, the largest, loudest energy to receive, actually. So it's quite an interesting, another I'm off on a tangent really, so I'll let that go for the minute. But basically, we've got this idea that's what the Essenes did. Some scholars now think the scrolls may have been transported from Jerusalem shortly before the Roman invasion. And if that's true, then the diversity of views contained in the scrolls suggests that mainstream Judaism was much more pluralistic. In other words, it was much more open and broad, but that marries into some of these things, as I keep mentioning, Jainism, Mithraism, all of those areas where basically you could have your own beliefs. Nobody was too worried about that. And that temples were essentially places to go and revere the God that you believed in, or to revere your own spirituality. It didn't matter, to go and contemplate, to think. Now, if you look at the origin of the word temple, by the way, it was palace. It wasn't actually any kind of religion. Again, religion came later. Before that, you had pretty much what we're trying to achieve in a lot of ways now is the more pure form of spirituality, where what you undertook to get your spirituality, to live your spirituality, to feel your spirituality was pretty much up to you. Just don't do any harm. Okay, Jainism, don't do harm. It's a big deal. That was the hand with the symbol on it, remember? But if it was that huge and that broad and that wise, then what we know is that there were no Christian writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so it also means that because the Bible that is seen of as Christianity reflects so much of what was in the Torah originally anyway, that essentially that it's this what do you call it, hot pot, if you like, of belief that actually left way open to give a rise to something like Christianity, because we had prophecies. If you want to look at a prediction of the Messiah, there is a question as to whether that's actually Buddha or Christ. If there were three, it's both of them. There's a lot of questions around exactly what is meant by that. We have, in retrospect, or somebody in retrospect, placed that label on that person, like the Dalai Lama, and I love him for saying that. When I saw him in an interview so many years ago now, and they asked him about his reincarnation, and he said quite clearly, he says, I have no recollection of it, but from my earliest recollection, I have been told and taught that I am the Dalai Lama and that I am the reincarnation of this man, and so I live that. It's a powerful, huge, amazing thing to look at. Early Christianity was not a hybrid of Judaism and Hellenism even. It was rooted in the native soil. It was rooted in Palestine. It was rooted in these times with all of these writings that are taken and used today in every church in the world in some form, shape or other, except Buddhists. Okay, Muslims, the Islams use the same text to a certain extent. The only one that's really different is the Buddhist text that they use. But even then, there are similarities that don't pertain to the gods, because of course we have Buddha and we have all of these other things going on. Quite noticeable that there's really not much between any of it except Buddhism is quite different. You'd think that, after half a century, it's more than that now, more than half a century of study, that they may prove that the most important finding of Emmanuel Tov and his colleagues who have been exploring as well, there's been so many teams exploring it, was the scrolls of Qumran are a powerful reminder that the shared heritage of both faiths. And I think, the more you get two or three faiths fighting each other, the more likely it is that they're rooted in the same basis, and their competition is about not wanting to share the space more than anything else. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. It's a little bit rambling because I wanted to sort of generalize and show that this is a powerful piece. And next week on Voices from the Past, I'm going to be looking specifically at the Book of Giants, which is the most phenomenal, did I say that loud enough? Phenomenal book you could ever come across, or group of writings you could come across. And even with what we understand in the Bible, which has, as I said, if you've got a later version of the Bible, these parts will be in it, or parts of it will be in it. It's fair to say that the Enochian writings, the Enochian tablets or writings, was well known to the ancients, really well known, and it's obscure to modern Bible readers today. It gives him an age. This is Enoch of 365 years, and we've all heard these stories of these guys that live forever. So we're going to be talking a lot about the book of giants, these super-sized, super-aged humans. In the book of Genesis, all they say about him is that he walked with God, and afterwards he was not, because God had taken him, which is Genesis 5:24. And this exalted way of life and mysterious demise made Enoch a figure of considerable fascination for me. And a cycle of legends grew up around him. And yet in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a lot more information about the Book of Giants. So we'll be looking at that. Now, on a psychic affair on Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. EST, I'm doing a show on quantum time, changing the future to alter the past. Ka-ching! Isn't that interesting now? Thank you very much for coming, everybody, and we'll catch you on the roundabout. Remember this week, please don't be a part of your own problem. Ciao for now.